Hey guys, this is Ash and you're watching WriterGAsh. Welcome to my March wrap-up slash Tistadam Readathon wrap-up. So in the month of March, if you don't know already, I participated in Tistadam Readathon, which is a Taylor Swift themed readathon. I'm linking my TBR up in the card up there, and yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. Actually, before we go into it, I also stumbled into the magical readathon, more about which to come in my next video. And I absolutely fell in love with the idea and I had to participate. But then I discovered, hey, the magical readathon had the novice path, has character creation prompts, and has a gear up in March. So I rushed, and since the magical readathon happened back when, I managed to catch up with all the character prompts, because character prompts literally were any books you'd read within that period of time between September and April. So I filled in those prompts, finished the novice path, and since novice path already happened, I did the same for the novice path, and then I geared up for the gear up, and some of the books I read for Tistadam Readathon magically also counted for the what's it called, the gear up. So I completed the things in time and it was absolutely great. Anyway, without further ado, let's get on to the actual wrap up. The first book I read this month was The X-Talk by Rachel Lynn Solomon. And I gave this book a 5-star. I absolutely loved this book. So this is about two radio hosts, not really hosts. They work in the radio, public radio. And their boss basically makes them fake being exes to do a podcast with exes on it. And that begins this like amazing story. I have read a lot of fake relationships. Hell, I probably even read a few this month, but I have never read a fake relationship with fake exes. Anyway, with that being said, highly recommend it. It was a fun read. The next book I read this month was the first book for Tistadam Readathon, and it was Truth Witch. And I read that for the Fearless prompt, and I read it for 15, which had me read a YA book in the YA genre. Truth Witch is a book by Susan Dennard. It's a series, part of the Witchland series. It's the first book in the series, and it is about two best friends basically going on an adventure. In this world, there are different types of witches. There are thread witches, there are wind witches, there are tide witches, fire witches, and all of these people have like powers that are like amazing. It's a very unique magic system. And our two protagonists, one is a thread witch and one is a truth witch. A truth witch is rare witchery, basically, and no one else knows. And when people find out that she might be a truth witch, they come after her. So to protect herself, her and her thread sister slash best friend kind of make an escape for it. And it follows their journey. A lot of things happen in this series. A lot of characters come in. But I think at the core of it, it is the story of these two sisters, in my opinion. And it is a great story. I read this book when it first came out. I loved it. I was so excited for the sequel. I read the sequel and I liked it. At that point, I loved it. And now that I'm thinking about it, I just liked it at best. But then I read the novella and I did not like that. And I stopped reading the series. And I've always regretted not continuing. So I thought this was the perfect time to go back into it. Also, quick correction. I actually did not read Truth Witch for Fearless. I read it for 1989 and it fit my bad blood prompt, which was to read a book about a morally great character, and Edwin, a character in this book, was a perfect morally great character. The next book I read was for the Lovers prompt, which I read a 5-star prediction, And the book I read did meet my expectations. It was hook, line, and sinker. And it had me hook, line, and sinker. It's a book by Tessa Bailey. It's the second book in the Bellinger series. It's about Piper. It's about Piper's sister, Hannah, and she goes to the town where her sister is. It's a fishing town, and they're from LA. And she goes there and takes her like film crew with her because she thinks the town would be the perfect setting. And there, one of her friends, and the blurb or the description says her best friend, which I don't think so. They've known each other 6 months. But one of her friends decides to let her crash with her because she can't crash with her sister. And they have an intense... Their relationship is great. I will give you that. I kind of loved their story a lot more than I liked Piper's story. I think they just worked better. They were just better, more organic. And I love this story a lot more. Both of those stories were great. The next one is what I read for 15. I read Wind Witch, which is the second book in the Truth Witch series, which I can't talk much about without spoiling Truth Witch, so read that book. Anyway, so Wind Witch I read for 15, which, again, YA genre. And then after that, I read Roomies. So Roomies I read for Taylor Swift. It is a book about a fake marriage where it's like a green card marriage, where this girl offers to marry this guy because she has a crush on him and he needs a visa. She doesn't tell him that she had a crush on him. It's just a really strange book. I gave it a 3-star, but if I'm being honest, I wanted to give it a 2.5. The only redeeming thing about it was it's set in New York and I was in New York while I was reading it, which brings me to the really, really funny thing. So this book was the first of 3. This one I read while in New York. It's set in New York. And I read this for our song prompt, which is to read a book about music. It's not about music, but it's like heavily themed around music. He's a musician. The next book is A Brush with Love, which I was so excited about when I heard about it. I had no idea this thing was going to happen that I found out later. But this was my pick, like my surprise TBR pick, which I read for the Evermore prompt for Evermore to surprise yourself. So I picked it from that mug right there, and it was a great book. I really enjoyed it. It's about 2 dental students who meet as one of them is about to graduate and one of them isn't really in love with dentistry, the other one is, and she struggles with letting people in. It's a great book, but that's not what had me excited. I had just gotten back from New York and I started reading it. And it's set in Philadelphia. I live in Philly, for context. So I read a book set in New York, come back home for 2 days, and I read a book set in Philly, and then I go to Chicago for a conference, and guess where, not all of it, but like a couple of chapters of my next book is set Chicago. So I was super excited about the coincidence, because let me tell you, I had not planned on going to New York when I planned this TBR. New York was a last minute thing. And I had no idea there was any mention of Chicago in the next one, or the fact that A Brush with Love was set in Philadelphia. I was so happy because it would talk about places that I love. Like one of my favorite Indian restaurants gets a mention there. I mean, I love food, so I loved seeing those recommendations. Anyway, the next one is what I read for Folklore, and it is the one I read for Exile, a book written by two authors. I love Exile. It's one of my favorite Taylor Swift songs. Anyway, so I read the roughest draft. It's about 2 co-authors who have a explosive breakup, not relationship-wise breakup. They have a professional breakup, and them having to work together to fulfill a last contract, basically. And it's a great book. I enjoyed it, gave it a 3.75/4 stars. Recommend it. It did, trigger warning / spoiler, cheating. There wasn't physical cheating, but in my opinion, emotional cheating's cheating, and there was that. Not the characters cheating on each other, but they're cheating on other partners emotionally. That brings me to my next book, which has nothing to do with cheating, but I read this for my Speak Now prompt, and I read it for if this was a movie, which was to read a book to movie adaptation, basically something that has a movie adaptation. In December, I watched The Hating Game, and it's one of my favorite contemporaries, so I was like, let's reread Hating Game. Great book, still think it's a 5 out of 5. I know every criticism about it is completely valid, but it's just a feel-good book for me. So at this point is when I realized I need to read for the gear up for Orilium. And while that's not the focus of this video, I did have to read an extra book that wasn't on my Tistadam Readathon TBR for Orilium, the gear up, and it was for the crystal prompt, which is a conduit. I'll talk more about all of that in my next video that's coming out tomorrow. So keep an eye out. So for this one, I read a book called Sunlight Over Crystal Sands. I knew I wasn't going to like it when I read it. I did not like it when I read it. I gave it a 2 stars. It's by Holly Martin. It's, I think, the 4th book in a series. It's part of the Jewel Islands. I didn't like the pacing. I didn't like the characters all that much. They felt very two-dimensional. I don't know. It might have just been me. But this story is basically about 2 people who hook up, and then the next day he's gone. They go to work a few weeks later, and there he is. They're both working together now, day in and day out. And if you want to find out more, it's a quick read. It's like, it took me a day and I didn't like it. When I don't like a book, it takes a long time reading it, and I didn't like it and I read it in a day. The next book is part of the Vigilance series again, and this one I read for the red prompt, something that had red on the cover. I read Blood Witch, 3rd book in the series by Susan Dennard. I audiobooked it. I love audiobooks. I've really gotten back into them. This is when the series got good again for me. I really enjoyed this book, I will say. I gave it a 4 stars, which, I mean, I was getting back into it. The next book I read was an arc that I did not expect to come through. This one hasn't officially been listed on NetGalley yet, or at that point hadn't been listed. Because I had reviewed the previous book in this series, they gave me early access, and I was so excited because I love this series. So I had to pick it up. It's The Hookup Plan by Farah Rochon, and it unexpectedly fit my goal for like this readathon. So while it's not a requirement, you can use the blank space to replace any of the other prompts. I decided to do it another way. I decided to use the blank space as a prompt. I was gonna read a book for the blank space. So initially I had Sweet Hand, which I'm going to be reading. It's on my April TBR because I'm not swishing that away. It's definitely on my TBR, but dude, the main character's name in this book was Drew, the guy. His name was Drew. And one of the blank space prompts is to read a book with one of Taylor's characters. And Drew is one of Taylor's characters. It just was serendipitous, and I had to. So The Hookup Plan, as you can tell by my excitement, 5 out of 5 stars. I don't think it's a spoiler to talk about it because it's a series, but you can read them on their own. So these 3 women meet after finding out that the guy they were dating, kind of casually dating, not casually, but like they were seeing. They'd gone on dates. We're 3-timing them, or more than 3-timing them, who knows. And then they meet, they go viral, but these 3 women become really close friends. And they decide to do this thing called their like boyfriend projects. The Boyfriend Project is the first book. Loved that, read that in I think January, freaking loved it. And then each of them set goals for themselves. One of them wanted to create an app they've been dreaming about creating for a while. The other wanted to go back to school and get their college degree and like make their business better. The third just wanted a hobby. And this is about the third. So she goes to her high school reunion and sees her old nemesis. And then it leads to a one-night stand only for him to waltz into her work. And the rest is history. Read it. It was fantastic. I highly, highly recommend it. I'm not shy to say if I don't like an arc, but this was not the case. I loved this arc. The next book was Witch Shadow, which I read for Reputation. And it was for a book that had romance, but in a separate genre. The fourth book in the series for Witchlands. Really good book. Really enjoyed it. And with that, we call a close to the Tistodam Readathon, but not a close to my reading list for this month. Then I decided I wanted to go back to reading the in-depth series. I picked some of the in-depth books for my next month's TBR for Orilium, so I had to catch up to the series. So I finished reading Obsession in Death and Devoted in Death. They're mystery suspenseful novels. They're by J.D. Robb/Nora Roberts. I enjoyed them. I gave them 3.75 stars. I stopped reading these series after a while because I really used to get frustrated by one of the side characters that I couldn't even continue reading it because anytime she was there, it made my blood boil. I had an aversive reaction for no reason. It wasn't a justified aversive reaction, I will say. But I was like, hey, I should get back into it. I just skipped the book that I got stuck on, like I DNF'd a book and then moved right on. But I gave them both 3.75 stars and they were okay books. I'm really getting back into audiobooks and I read them as audiobooks. Anyway, so that is it for my March wrap up. I read 14 books. Can you believe it? Anyway, so I hope you guys have a great day and I will see you tomorrow for the Orilium TBR and a little guide into my character, her life, and who she is, because I really want you guys to know her.